So here we are, back for part 2. So as you may know, or you may be very confused if you just came here from somewhere completely different, I've made a Minisode that's a summary of my original 8-hour Kep1er OT8 video. And the Minisode, which was originally the summary and this video, was too long to be an actual Minisode. So I've split it in two. The first half, which I'll link in the description, discusses a summary of my 8-hour video. It's only like around half an hour, so much more consumable than an 8-hour video. And this video will discuss some quick updates about the OT8 subs since my original video came out, and some general takeaways from my original video and from the Kep1er OT8 and Kep1er situation in general. So it's going to be a lot more broad, it's going to be new content, and yeah, let's get into it, starting with some quick updates. My video on the Kep1er OT8 sub released on September 25th, 2023. The same day as Kep1er's weirdly under-promoted comeback with Galileo. There have been a few things that have happened since. I've already mentioned how the sub has become somewhat more active. I think this is because we are getting more and more sentimental Kep1er content towards the end of their contracts. And more sentimental Kep1er content means more content that paints Bahie in a good light. And the OT8s, especially No Bullshit, can't have that, can they? Another thing I've already mentioned is the inactivity of Athera Live, the deletion of Kep1er's account, and the partial inactivity of Irene Promoter, all of which started or happened shortly after my video was released. I'm not under any delusions that my video caused these things, or at least was the sole cause, but I do wonder if it could have been a factor, and how big of a factor it would have been. The OT8 sub right now seems to be No Bullshit running around insulting Bahie and only doing very sparing mod activities, while Irene Promoter shows up every few weeks for a few hours to insult some people, check the inbox, and skedaddle again. I'm actually quite upset about the loss of Kep1er's account. Their post history was insanely long, but it did include a lot of crucial information about the history of the OT8 sub, including a lot of first-hand data about the whole David being a Heolite debacle. It's a shame to lose all of that history, as it may be next to impossible to search for on the sub manually. As I predicted, the OT8 sub found my video, and they had a few things to say about it, including insulting my dance skills, which weren't shown in the video and are unrelated, and No Bullshit doing their signature action of insulting people. In this case, calling me a stalker who needs to go to a psych ward and calling my video a flop, despite it being by far the best performing video on this channel. No Bullshit was the one who banned me from the sub after I showed up, and the one who started a hate watch campaign against me, which gave me tons of engagement but which also ruined my perfect like ratio as OT8s showed up to watch hours of content while dislike bombing it. To this day, my video has more dislikes than likes. Right now it has 8 likes and 9 dislikes. In fact, my video is now the third or so result on Google when searching Kep1er OT8, and it hit 500 views on my birthday, which was nice. The only reasonable reactions to my video on the sub were 1, this user who provided some legitimate constructive criticism on my Kep1er without Bahie section. I don't agree with a bunch of what they said, but at least they had the common sense to realise that some of the things I said were just obvious. This user was actually one of the ones I called out in my original 8-hour video as a rare example of an OT8 who shows some rare critical thinking skills. And to my joy, they continued to show these skills under the post. They are still an OT8 and have showed some confirmation bias and have hated on Bahie, but at least they have a vague semblance of common sense. Their comments on my video were interesting and thought out. The other reasonable reaction came from an unlikely character, Kep1er 999 themselves. We had an interesting conversation about the nature and definition of nepotism, the history of the sub, and Heolites. Kep1er is vocally against Heolites far more so than Bahie herself, and has advocated in the sub for a ban against animal name calling of Bahie, and other similar things. You may notice that many, unfortunately not all, but many, of their comments on OT8 subposts are just basic observations or annoyance at Heolites rather than senseless insults against Bahia herself. Kep1er and I came to some sort of conclusions, maybe? We decided that Kai's promotion of Bahia on V-Lives was in fact a bad thing, and in my opinion far worse and more prevalent than anything Bahia has done to associate herself with him. Hence we decided that Kai should be the one to be blamed for the whole nepotism issue, not Bahia, since he was a far more active party in it than her. It is also far from a one-off case in K-pop, and their situation is far from a world-ending textbook example of nepotism. It was an overall productive conversation and we resolved a lot of misunderstandings. Kep1er even said I seemed sweet, which is nice. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for my other conversation with an OT8, which came when Promoter messaged me with a link to a supposed takedown of my video that she had done, one which didn't actually get around to addressing any of my points or arguments. Similarly, in our DMs, which are at this point tens of thousands of words long, Promoter seemed incapable of addressing any of my arguments, and instead avoided any definitions I used, questions I asked her, or arguments I made, which basically led us in circles. By spitting terminology at me and calling my arguments whataboutisms, Promoter actively avoided discussing anything with me, which, I suppose, would have been okay, except that she spent the rest of her DMs to me, relentlessly insulting Bahia and I, and then threatening me with doxing, I guess, and ranting about random words I had used by coincidence. Throughout our whole conversation, she has seemed very paternalistic. She seems to think that her intelligence and knowledge is far superior to mine, and that I am so stupid I can't even comprehend even the most basic of her arguments. Which I suppose could be true, but it's one, highly unlikely, and two, someone who is truly more intelligent than the other person would put their arguments in clearer terms for that person. So the fact that I can't understand what Promoter is saying half the time suggests less about my intelligence and more about her communication skills. I understand English is not her first language, but she's shown herself time and time again to be capable of using high-level English skills and communication in the sub. So her not bothering to do that with me shows even more so how much she thinks that she's better than me. I can't think of another explanation. My first thought was maybe she thought I wasn't worth her time, but that still implies that she thinks she's better than me. And you should never go into a conversation, especially one like this, assuming that you're better and smarter than the other person. I felt very talked down to, and I didn't think it was for any real reason. My DMs with her are also a prime example of OT8's moving the bar. Promoter was constantly moving the bar for Bahia and I, and it seems like nothing either of us did would ever get through to her or be enough for her. Like, as a little example, maybe I would say something about proving I have critical thinking skills, and then she would say, but you don't understand nepotism properly, and I would try to explain that I know what nepotism is and I understand the impacts of it, etc. And in the end, no matter what I did or how many things I showed I understood, it would always come back to the fact that since I'm white and live in Australia, I can't understand anyone else's perspective ever. She also seemed obsessed with, 1, the idea that I have zero critical thinking skills, something I have definitionally disproven several times, and 2, with me being a stalker and doing illegal activity by making the video about the sub. She also neglected to provide a good chunk of the evidence I asked for to back up her claims. I've got permission from both Kep1er and Promoter to discuss our DMs in this video, and to allow you to make your own opinion, I've included Promoter and my entire chat log in the description if you want to bother reading it all. I have redacted identifying or personal information. I will say, it can get confusing. I did, especially earlier on, make a few shaky statements and arguments. But at the end of the day, I feel that those arguments in no way deserve the threats and insults Promoter sent to me, and her absolute refusal to treat Bahia like a regular human being, or to show her any semblance of respect. In my opinion, someone should be able to make an argument without attacking a person. Promoter ad hominem? And Irene Promoter has shown herself incapable of doing this. I don't even know why she would bother messaging me to begin with if she was so unwilling to accept anything I said. You can also see other things I've mentioned about the sub here, such as relentless confirmation bias and hypocritical statements. The comments on my video were also interesting, as expected. Of course, I got an OT8 who made an incest-related insult against Bahie and then refused to back it up with evidence because, of course, there is no evidence. I also had a Heolite come and defend Heolites, saying that since Bahie was sent death threats, they felt the need to defend her, which is fair for sure, but this Heolite couldn't provide any evidence of Bahie hate that I didn't already have, and hadn't already discussed in the video. And just because someone is being sent attacks doesn't mean it's okay to attack other people, in this case the other members, back. Anyway, she thanked me for the video, which is always nice. I also had a few comments which corrected me or added to my arguments, like pointing out how Kep1er were AI analysed to be 97% in sync, hence, how could Bahie be out of sync? And comments which pointed out some small details I'd missed. I even managed to attract a random non-OT8, non-Heolite, and possibly even non-Kep1er person, who was very confused about why I was engaging in such self-destructive behaviour. Some other people had interesting analysis, such as this user who analysed Bahie's stage presence and why she may have made more mistakes in Up Era. And here's someone who told me off for my pronunciation. I'm sorry. I have an accent and rushed the video out. I'm doing my best, but don't worry, I will work harder in the future. I was also thankful to receive lots of thanks for my hard work on the video, and especially for mentioning how bad Heolites can be. Something that isn't discussed nearly as much as OT8s, especially on platforms like YouTube. I also found out that there was a random anti-Chaehyun OT8 account running around, which is very weird. Why do you not want Chaehyun in the group? Now, as I mentioned in my original video, I was planning on making a part 2, which in this case would have looked at new posts and in detail at my DMs with Irene Promoter. I've decided not to do this since this sub is taking way too much energy for me, and frankly, I have more interesting and exciting podcast ideas I'd like to discuss. But I will say that a lot of my incomplete part 2 script is that in their reactions to my video and in my DMs with Irene Promoter, I found that a lot of the OT8s took my arguments in bad faith, assuming I was a troll, assuming I was a Heolite, or even a relative of Bahie, or just generally assuming that I was insulting OT8s when I wasn't. It made my life hard because it's hard to have a discussion with them when I have to first prove that I'm trustworthy, and they won't believe anything I say or do to try and demonstrate that. It's another example of confirmation bias on the sub. I made a video about them, so I must hate them and must be bad. There is one final development to discuss here. Since my video came out and I got banned from the sub, using my alt account, I have been doing some, what I like to call, low-key trolling of the sub. So, maybe I am a troll. By this, I mean I have not insulted Bahie in any way, but I have contributed to posts criticising Heolites, to attempt to show that Heolite content has a better place on the sub than Bahie content. And, when a post has shown a severe lack of critical thinking or is unevidenced, I have politely questioned them, as I promised I would in my 2-post discussion with no bullshit and at the start of my DMs with Irene Promoter. Probably the best example of this is a post which calls Bahie a leech for reacting to TXT's comeback with Deja Vu, and states that she reacts to every TXT comeback, like a leech. This just isn't true. I had a look, and as far as I could find, she's only reacted to Deja Vu. Leah has reacted to far more, but even she didn't react to Chasing That Feeling, or the Korean version of Good Boy Gone Bad, as far as I could find. I also found it funny that they said Bahie was a leech for reacting to Kai, but Kai and TXT have reacted to Bahie's content, so I commented exactly that. And the OP got very annoyed with me, but I was backed up by other random OT8s who also said that even though they don't like Bahie, my fact-based argument was correct. This person even pointed out how Bahie is brought up by TXT a lot. Notably recently, when Kai went on Lee Mujin's service and Lee Mujin himself brought up Bahie and asked how she was doing. Kai also has apparently said that the only non-TXT choreography he knows is Kep1er's, because he wants to be a good older brother. In the end, the weight of the facts against their argument caused the OP to block my alt account and to delete their original post, which is why I unfortunately can't show you their exact original wording. This just shows how the polite power of critical thinking, without defending Bahie, mind you, is sorely needed on the OT8 sub, and how some OT8 members, such as those who backed me up, also seem to want it. They just need someone who will say the reasonable bit out loud and potentially take the flak for it. So, to No Bullshit and Irene Promoter and other OT8s who are likely watching this video, here is my proof that I'm not just going to come into your sub insulting you and defending Bahie blindly left and right. As much as I hate your hate of Bahie, I do have actual substance to add to the conversation. And with that nice little update, let's finish up this video with some key takeaways from my original video and from the Kep1er OT8 situation in general. First, Bahie is nowhere near as bad as the OT8s say she is. She has not ruined Kep1er, she has not led to their downfall, she has not doomed them to Nugudom. They're literally a very successful and well-known group, if nothing else. Her fans have been a contributing factor to the polarization of Kep1er and their inability to achieve their full potential, but her fans are far from the only factor. Large other factors I can think of is primarily the terrible management of the group by Wakwon, but also how unpopular Girls Planet was compared to Produce, the poor timing of the show and their debut, and their comebacks, the division of the fandom even beyond Healites, the general colorism, racism, xenophobia, and ageism of the K-pop industry, and Bahie antis, who have also had a massive role in the polarization of the group. Bahie is responsible for none of these things, and Healites are only responsible solely for one: themselves. Now, while Bahie is nowhere near as bad as the OT8s say she is, it's important to note that she is almost nowhere near as good as rabid Healites say she is. She is not the best dancer and performer to ever exist, and she is not the most angelic person to ever exist. Her fans, on behalf of this smoothed-out mask of Bahie, have done horrible things. Both OT8s and Healites have spewed racist, ableist, sexist insults and more against each other, bystanders, and most importantly, the members of Kep1er, including Bahie. They are both horrible groups who deserve severe condemnation for their lack of basic human empathy and maturity. There are far better ways to criticize Bahie's skills than calling her dehumanizing names, and many have managed to do it, including myself and some comments on my original video. But even if Bahie was a terrible performer, she would still deserve her spot in the group. Every single girl on Girls Planet deserved a spot in the group, if nothing else, because of the human rights violating hardships they went through on the show. Does someone else like Urina, Bora, Suyeon deserve it more than Bahie? Sure, but someone deserving something more doesn't mean Bahie didn't deserve it. And even if Bahie was the worst person on the planet, which I think it's clear she definitely isn't, it still wouldn't be an excuse to dehumanize her. I can't believe people don't understand this basic fact of empathy, and that they don't understand the severe implications of dehumanizing people. This situation, like almost all situations in the world, and especially in K-pop, is suffering from human psychology and a lack of nuance. Our brains aren't designed to handle nuance and grey areas in things. That takes too much mental energy and time, and in a life or death situation, which is what they evolved for, we can't afford that. But modern society often isn't a life or death situation. We are humans with the most powerful brains of any animal on the planet, and we should use those brains for things that will better humanity. Like, critical thinking and avoiding relying on heuristics which lead to things like racism, sexism, ableism, etc. K-pop fans, like most mass social groups, seem allergic to nuance. Everything has to be black or white. This idol has to either be an amazing or terrible dancer, an amazing or terrible person, etc. They can never just be a normal person. This situation, more so than many in K-pop, is in need of a big, Titan-sized tsunami's worth of nuance. Bahie is neither the best performer or the worst. She is neither devilish nor angelic. She is neither the prettiest person to ever exist or the ugliest. She is just a person with above-average dancing and singing skills who has improved a lot over time, who is pretty to some and not so pretty to others. A regular human being. I think we need to remember that Bahie had only been formally training for a little more than a year before she was on Girls Planet. Her key word was literally new trainee. We can't reasonably expect her to be on the same level as people who have been training for years or even decades. She does her job and she does it well. She's getting better every day. She has a nice idol personality and seems to make friends easily. She would probably be well suited to a show like Eunchae's Star Diary. I don't know what more people want from her that is under her control, as opposed to under the control of Wake1, who seems intent on underusing her skills. But even then, she's not the most funny idol to ever exist, but she's not boring either. She has the skills she needs, and, well, that's all she needs. I could go on like this forever. The moral of the story is that she is somewhere in between how the Heolites and OT8s portray her. I'm going to say probably around here on the scale. And we need to consider other factors, like the lack of training and how impossible it is to understand someone's entire personality from one action or one 10-second clip. So with that done, let's end this minisode. In this video, I've given some quick updates on what's going on in the sub and the fallout of my original video, which is now approaching 700 views, well eclipsing everything else on my channel, and my Palsy subscriber count of 19 people. Finally, I've discussed some key takeaways from my original video, that Bahie is neither the reincarnation of the devil or the greatest angel to ever exist, that both OT8s and Heolites have done terrible things. Hence, there is no real right side, although I would argue that the right side is the third one that picks empathy and doesn't insult people on either side, as I have tried to do in these now 3 videos. I've also touched on the need for nuance in K-pop, something which will definitely become a recurring theme with me. Both my psychology and media backgrounds stress nuance, especially in media and social psychology situations and representations, which K-pop is a perfect blend of. So if you're interested in seeing more analyses of nuance and representations in K-pop, please give me a sub. I have lots of interesting nuanced topics planned. So to you, the viewer, keep in mind the nuance in this situation and others. Don't let yourself be swayed by either side because, as I've said many times now, Bahie isn't as brilliant as the Heolites portray her, and she's nowhere near as horrible as the OT8s portray her. And that goes for all of us human beings. So with that in mind, that is the end of my video. Let's see where this saga maybe does or maybe doesn't go in the future. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.